Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'll be looking into the circulatory system as well as the tissue fluid. And this is from the mass transport in animals topic from the A-level biology curriculum. So let's begin. Alright, so first we are looking at veins. So you need to know that veins carry blood towards the heart. So one way of remembering it, because the blood's going into the heart, and that veins have the inside them, so way in, so the blood is going into the heart. And it's usually, so most of the time, it's just deoxygenated blood which is being carried towards the heart, with one exception which we will look at. And then now arteries. So arteries, the opposite of veins, basically, because they carry the blood away from the heart. And again, remembering that away, so away begins with A, and arteries also begin with A. So arteries carry blood away from the heart, and again, it's oxygenated blood this time, with one exception, which we will look at later on. Okay, so next is the aorta. So aorta carries oxygenated blood from the heart to the rest of the body, as well as organs. So aorta is basically a type of artery because it's carrying blood away from the heart. So in the diagram, as you can see, we have the heart there, and we have the aorta carrying blood away from the heart. Next, vena cava. So what vena cava does is it carries deoxygenated blood to the heart. So as you can see there, the deoxygenated blood would be going to the right side of the heart. Remember, the right side is on the left and the left side is on the right. And so the vena cava would be carrying deoxygenated blood into the right side of the heart. And next we have coronary artery. So a common question has been that what is the function of coronary arteries? So you just need to know that coronary arteries carries oxygen as well as, for example, glucose to heart muscles, to keep them going, and coronary arteries are located on the outside of the heart. Okay, so now to help you remember, you don't need to know the exact name of every artery or every vessel in the body. You can work it out. So whenever you see the name pulmonary, it just basically means lungs. So if we're talking about pulmonary artery, that would mean it's carrying the blood away from the heart towards the lungs. If it's pulmonary veins, it's carrying blood into the heart, and from the lungs. But remember when I said that veins usually carry deoxygenated blood? Now this is the only exception. So for example, the pulmonary artery, instead of carrying oxygenated blood away from the heart to the lungs, it carries deoxygenated blood away from the heart to the lungs. And it's the opposite for pulmonary vein. So pulmonary vein, instead of carrying deoxygenated blood towards the heart, it will carry oxygenated blood towards the heart. Now this is because the lungs will be oxygenating the blood, because the lungs will have the oxygen. The oxygen will be coming into the lungs. So next, you should be aware that whenever the name hepatic is mentioned, it's always related to the liver. So for example, hepatic vein would be carrying blood, so it'd be the deoxygenated blood towards the heart and from the liver, whereas the hepatic artery would be carrying oxygenated blood away from the heart into the liver. And next is the renal. So renal, whenever we talk about renal, it just means it's related to the kidneys. So for example, renal artery would be carrying the oxygenated blood away from the heart into the kidneys, whereas the renal veins would be carrying the deoxygenated blood back to the heart from the kidneys. Okay, so next you are basically required to know the growth structure and the function of each type of vessel. So this diagram just shows that when the heart, so from the heart, and we first have the arteries coming along, carrying blood away from the heart, and then the arterioles, and next we have the capillaries, which form this network of capillaries called capillary bed, which we will be looking at later on. Then we have the venules, and finally the vein, which will carry the blood back into the heart. And this basically goes along in a cycle. So first the red representing the oxygenated blood. So this blood will be rich in oxygen, whereas towards the end, this blood will be very low in oxygen, and it will need resupplying. That's why it will go to the heart, which will be taken to the lungs to make them oxygenated again. And this will just carry on. You'll be required to know the function as well as the structure for some of these in more detail. But one thing you need to know is for all of these vessels, we have a smooth endothelium layer, and this is just to reduce friction. So all of these would have this smooth endothelium layer. This would just reduce friction. This is arteries. So arteries carry the blood from the heart to the rest of the body, as we previously mentioned, and you need to know that this is done at very high pressure, and we'll be looking at what allows it to maintain that high pressure. But okay, so first looking at the diagram of an artery. So this is an artery, so you need to know that this has a small lumen. So lumen is just basically the gap inside it which allows the red blood cells to move along. So this has a small lumen, and this is useful for maintaining the high pressure. And so now looking at other things, so the arteries have this thick outer wall. So this thicker outer wall allows it to withstand that high pressure that it has, because otherwise if it had a very thin wall, or if it had no wall at all, when this blood will be passing through at high pressure, this could potentially burst the artery, which could be fatal, as that would be leading to a hemorrhage. And next, they have a thick elastic tissue, so that red bit in the middle, so this just stretches under high pressure, and that would recoil at low pressure, and that stretching and that recoiling would just maintain the pressure inside the arteries. And also they have a very thick muscular layer, so again in that red bit, and so when the muscle contracts, it would reduce the diameter of the lumen. So the diameter would be reduced, so it would make it smaller, so that could increase the pressure, and when the muscles would relax, the diameter would be back to normal, and this again would be maintaining blood pressure inside the arteries. And as always, they have a smooth endothelium layer to reduce friction. Remember, this is for all of them. So just looking at arterioles, so the arteries basically branch into arterioles. So this is just a division of the arteries to smaller vessels which direct blood to different capillaries. So for example, if this was an artery, the arterioles basically have the same kind of structure. They're just smaller, and these would just direct the blood to different capillaries. So they're just thinner than the artery, and they would have lower blood pressure because they are thinner. They have smaller muscles, smaller elastic tissue, so therefore the blood pressure would be lower. So now into the capillaries. So capillaries carry the blood at a very low pressure, and this is to the cells as well as the tissues. And because they carry the blood at a low pressure, this allows for an efficient exchange. So one thing you need to be aware of is that there are capillary beds in that capillaries form, and this is basically a network of capillaries. And this is very useful as this can increase the surface area, and it ensures that all cells would get sufficient oxygen. So for example, so this is a capillary bed. So for example, if we did not have a capillary bed, and let's say if that was just to be the capillary, then that would mean that if a cell was around here or there, then it wouldn't be able to get enough supply of oxygen. But now, because there's capillary beds, so if a cell was here or there, so these capillaries would allow it to, because the oxygen would be traveling along the capillaries, it would allow the oxygen to diffuse to every cell. So every cell is able to get oxygen and to be able to respire, because of these capillary beds. So they are very useful. And capillaries only have a smooth endothelium layer, so having that reduces friction, but they only have one layer. So as you can see there, so this is the only layer there, so they only have that smooth endothelium layer, and this means that they are very thin, so they are one cell thick, and this just means that there would be a shorter diffusion pathway for oxygen into the cells. This just allows for a faster diffusion, so when our cells need to respire quickly, this is very useful. Right, so now looking into veins. So veins have a thin muscle layer and a thin wall. So as you can see in this diagram, so they have a thin wall as well as a thin muscular layer, and this is because they are carrying blood at a low pressure, so they don't need a thick wall or a thick muscle layer. And because of that thin layer and that thin wall, and that means that the veins can be flattened, so this could help blood flow. For example, so they don't always have that circular shape, so for example they could form this shape as you can see in the diagram. So this can be again very useful for blood flow, and they contain valves to prevent backflow. So as you would remember, valves just prevent backflow. If you imagine if the blood is being carried from your leg and to your heart, it would be working against gravity, and gravity would try and pull the blood down, and this could lead to backflow. So your blood wouldn't be reaching your heart. So these valves would be very effective, as the blood is passing by, it just shuts down and it prevents any backflow from happening. So it would just be moving the blood upwards and not downwards. Okay, so now on to the tissue fluid formation. So I'll be using this diagram to guide us. So you just need to know that this is the arterial end and this is the venial end. So arterial end would be obviously joined to the arterioles, and the venial end would be joined to the venules. So what happens first is that blood would enter the capillaries from the arterial end, so from the arterioles, leading to a high hydrostatic pressure at the arterial end. So the blood would be coming along this end, so the arterial end, and this would lead to a high hydrostatic pressure at this end because it's coming with a lot of pressure, as the arterioles have a high pressure. So what happens is, because of this high hydrostatic pressure, water, amino acids, glucose would be forced out. So the smaller things would be forced out of the arteriole, so from this end, so from this arterial end, and when they move outside, so when water, amino acids, and glucose, so when they move outside into this area, this would be called our tissue fluid. So this is our tissue fluid containing the water, amino acid, glucose, and this is needed by, for example, the cells. The cells would need glucose to be able to respire. So this is very important, as well as, for example, amino acids to be able to make polypeptides. Okay, so you also need to know that large molecules such as proteins would remain in the capillary, simply because these proteins are too big to leave the capillary, so they won't be able to leave the capillary and they will remain in the capillary. Alright, so now looking at the tissue fluid return. So the hydrostatic pressure reduces as the fluid leaves the capillary. So when we had that blood plasma or the fluid inside the capillary, there was high hydrostatic pressure because we had a lot of water in there, which was causing the high hydrostatic pressure. But now, as this has left, this has caused the hydrostatic pressure to reduce towards the venial end, towards the end of the capillary. And there would be a lower water potential in the capillary, as the proteins that we originally had, which were not able to move out of the capillary, remain in the capillary. So we have proteins, so the big proteins still in the capillary, which are unable to move out. So they cause the water potential to reduce, to lower. And so at the renal end of the capillary, the water re-enters the capillaries by osmosis. So if our tissue fluid was there, so there would be water there as well, and the water is now moving back into the renal end, so into the capillary, by osmosis, so from high concentration to low concentration, or high water potential to low water potential. And finally, the excess tissue fluid which we have here. So remember that we need to get rid of this tissue fluid, but because this will now contain, for example, carbon dioxide and other waste products which we need to get rid of as our cells have respired, and so they have used the oxygen, so now we have the CO2, so we need to get rid of this. And not all of the fluid or the water would be reabsorbed into the capillary. Some will be still left over, and the final bit is from the lymphatic system. So the lymph vessel would drain the excess tissue fluid, so that would be removed. So the carbon dioxide and other waste products would be removed, and this is the tissue fluid return. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you did like this video, don't forget to subscribe to see more of these, and you can watch my recent videos by clicking on the links popping up. Thank you.